Hello, everyone, and welcome to another insightful conversation here at Fairfax Surrogacy. I'm glad that you're here today because I know this is going to be a meaningful and really helpful conversation. Today, we're going to be diving into a very personal and often overwhelming part of this process, and that is choosing your egg or sperm donor or your surrogate. And I'm honored to be joined today by Lisa Schumann, who is the founder of the Center for Family Building and has helped thousands of intended parents with their journey, not only with deep expertise, but also with a whole lot of heart. Welcome, Lisa, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Perla. It's an honor to speak with you.
It is my honor as well. And to start, I would love for you, Lisa, to share a little bit more about who you are and what brought you to this work.
Well, about 30 years ago, a little bit more than that, I was going through my own family building journey. And I tried everything under the sun, as many patients do. And so I really understand how difficult it can be. I've tried every treatment, I tried surrogacy, we tried everything. And it was really a heartbreaking experience. And at the time, my doctor thought that, and I was a therapist practicing at the time in maternal health and also lots of other areas. And I had seen some infertility patients, and he thought I should join his practice. And so I went to the ASRM, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, for all those who are not familiar with it, and got some training. And I've been going every year since. And I continue to get training because it's important to always learn, even after all these years and seeing thousands of patients. But I went on to be director of mental health services. This was my last job at Loom Fertility, and I was director of mental health services for gay parents to be. And then this last year, I decided to start my own platform, which I'm really excited about because it really encompasses everything that I've ever done. So I have published a book on donor conception. I've run some courses about surrogacy. I've talked about so many things that I have insights into because I've seen so many people, and I think it really can help a lot of people. So I created a platform to help people get the education and the community they need. It's filled with lots of resources, lots of stress reduction activities, lots of courses on everything they need to know. And it's very reasonably priced, and I think it will save patients a lot of heartache. And it's exactly what I wish I had when I was going through my journey.
Thank you so much. And that's so important because not only do you bring the personal experience, but the professional expertise, and that is a well-rounded type of support that you can provide to those navigating this journey. So, Lisa, before we get into the logistics, I do want to acknowledge, just like you mentioned, that how emotional this process is for most people. It's not just about reading profiles or filling out paperwork. You are imagining your future child, but also navigating a process that maybe wasn't the first path you talked about or you thought about when thinking about creating your family. So that can feel very, very heavy. And I'm just so glad that there are people like you that can provide support to those navigating this journey. So on that note, Lisa, what do you notice about how people feel when they start thinking about choosing donors or surrogates?
So I also have a lot of, I didn't mention before, I have a podcast called Building Your Family, just like my book is called Building Your Family, and the community is called Building Your Family. And I talk a lot about these subjects on my podcast because it's so important to really appreciate your emotional life. And really for two reasons. So first of all, we all know that people going through fertility treatment unsuccessfully can have the same levels of depression as people who are experiencing chemotherapy or have heart disease. And so we know how difficult it is. We also know that it is difficult on your self-esteem. There's a grief and loss, but also a drop in self-esteem. People very often feel badly about themselves. If things don't work out, they blame themselves. And so there's a lot of difficult feelings involved in this. And the problem with that is that as you go through this, it can also cloud your decision making. And so it's important to get the support that you can, not just because you need to feel better, because that's the most important thing. And it's the number one reason why people stop pursuing parenthood is because of stress, but also because it can cloud your decision making. And so I talk a lot about this in my book and my podcast, but I think both in surrogacy and in donor conception, people very often react in a way that will make them feel more comfortable. They want to feel comfortable with the process. This is something very foreign to them. And of course, right, we don't naturally think, okay, I'm going to need a surrogate when I'm a little kid thinking I'm going to grow up and needing a surrogate. Maybe you're a gay couple and you think maybe this won't happen for me at home, but you haven't really thought through the details of surrogacy or donor conception. So it's new to everybody when they start, and it can be overwhelming and very frustrating and very stressful. And so it's really important to make sure that you can do what you can to regulate your nervous system so that you can make your decisions more clearly.
Thank you for that, Lisa. I mean, I have gone through IVF. I didn't get to the egg donor or surrogacy part, but even IVF itself is extremely stressful.
Yeah.
And not knowing what's going to happen if you're going to be able to have a baby at the end of the road, and especially when you have several failed cycles. And many of our intended parents, before they pursue, some of them know since the very beginning, like you talked about a same-sex couple, but there are others that have had a long journey already
Yes.
before they have to switch to looking for an egg donor or a sperm donor or a surrogate. And that can be a whole lot, a new set all of new emotions. And it's a new process starting over again. So it
Yes.
is very difficult to navigate without support for sure.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's very, very difficult. And very often people feel like, why is this happening? Why do I have to
Mhm.
start all over again? And now I have to learn a whole new world that I don't know anything about.
Yeah. It is truly a miracle creating a life. You don't really realize how many things have to go right until
Yeah.
you're really in the process. It's wonderful. Um, so Lisa, when someone starts looking at profiles for
Mhm.
both, for either an egg donor, sperm donor, or a surrogate, it can be a very overwhelming process. Where do you suggest people start?
So, as I said before, I think one of the most difficult things that happens to people is that their stress is connected to their behavior. So we think lots of times in life, right? I don't feel like going to work today, but I go. I don't feel like doing something, but I do it anyway, right? But in this process, we often feel like it's going to make me feel better to feel comfortable with my decision. So comfort is different for everyone. And some people might say, oh, I want a donor who looks like my mother, or I want a donor who's really smart or very talented because everybody plays the violin in my family, or I want a surrogate who lives nearby me because that might be a nice thing to be able to be close to her and not to have to hop on a plane. This is so expensive. So while all of those things are reasonable and valid, they're not the most important things to think about first. And if we guide our decisions based upon that first, sometimes we can make the wrong decision. And so we have to realize what we're doing when we're making these decisions and think about, are these the most important ways to make a decision that will help me in the long term?
I'm glad that you mentioned that because my next question for you is, what are the top things that people should be looking for when selecting a donor or a surrogate? And it may be different for each of them.
Mhm. Yes. So what we're really thinking about is genetics with a donor And what we're thinking about is lifestyle with the surrogate, right? And so even when we do psychological screening for both, we're looking for different things, right? An egg donor who is a lovely person but has alcoholism on both sides of their family, we would not want for an egg donor, no matter how wonderful she is, even if she's not an alcoholic, and she just has this as part of her history because we're inheriting her genes. With a surrogate, it won't matter, right? Because if that happened in her past and she's functioning well and having a great life and has lots of support, then that won't matter as much whether or not her parents were alcoholic at some point, right? So we're looking for different things. But I think in both cases, we need to think about what's most important for our future child. So with the donors, and I have a whole course on this on my platform, and also I have a chapter devoted to it in the book. I talk about 5 steps to choosing a donor. So I'll just briefly tell you. So I think the number one thing is to remember, again, you're not getting this person, you're getting her genetics. You're getting her mother's freckles and her father's dimples and her uncle's crooked teeth and her aunt's curly hair. So we know that in families, not everybody looks exactly alike. And yet when we see these profiles, we're looking on like a Match.com sort of site, and we feel like we have to pick somebody who is right for our family, but we're not necessarily getting her. So how can we think about it differently? So let's think about the most important thing, which is the health of our child. When you see a genetic counselor, you're probably going to look for recessive carrier screening and see if there's a difficulty in the history of the donor, and if that matches the same sort of profile in your family. And if both of you are carriers for the same difficulty, then you don't want to combine those genetics because it could be more problematic. But you can take it one step further and start to think about how that applies to your family. So donors are healthy and young. All donors are going to be healthy. They're screened, they're young people, but health does change over time. And so over time, people die of things. People get cancer or heart disease, and that's natural. What's not natural is dying young, and so those people would be excluded. But if their grandparents die of heart disease or colon cancer, we just expect that would be true. But what if you looked at your family and said, oh, my grandfather died of colon cancer, and this donor's grandfather died of colon cancer too? Now, all of a sudden, it's in both sides of your family. So I think that's the first and most important thing. And then I go down a list of other less important things, and certainly openness is helpful. Being able to feel good about your donor is helpful. Being able to have other things that you don't replicate, like diabetes or poor eyesight or allergies, those things are helpful too. But I think the number one most helpful thing is to think about severe difficulties, because once you have that in your genetics, that's not something you can unwind. So I think it's really important to think about things in a different order. And with a surrogate, I think it's really important. First of all, you want to make sure you have a good agency. And what's really hard is when you feel stressed and you think, I need to find a good agency, you look at the website, you may look at reviews, you may, talk to your friend, but maybe your friend had a different experience than you're going to have. Maybe the website's beautiful, but it's not really run by people who are really well established, really experienced. And so naturally, we just want, again, to feel comfortable. So we say, oh, that website's great. It has a couple of reviews. I get a good feeling about them. But that doesn't necessarily help us, right? If we were going to a heart surgeon, what would we say? We would say, we want the heart surgeon to have lots of years of experience. We want him to be very well known in the industry. We want them to have lots of cases that he's successfully operated on, right? You don't want to be the first person in the doctor's hands to ever operate on, right? So if you work with people who have been there and done that and have seen lots and lots of cases, have been in the business for years, and really know how to manage a surrogacy case, you know that they've seen it all. And if there's a problem that comes down the line, because that's what you're worried about in surrogacy, right? If something goes wrong, if the relationship gets disrupted, if there's a problem with now we have to, be concerned about different laws in different states and restricting women's health care. What if, God forbid, you need to terminate? Where are you going to be? You want an agency that is staffed with people who've been around and have seen lots and lots of cases. And so you can feel confident knowing that if, God forbid, something goes wrong, they can handle this problem. So yes, it's nice to have a surrogate that's near you, but it's more important to have a good agency and to have a surrogate who is in line with your value system, who really feels similarly to you with all sorts of things: medical testing and termination issues, pregnancy and delivery plans, how much contact you want. All of those things are really important to have. And having her next door is much less important because ultimately, again, we're talking about the health and well-being of your future child.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And that's so true. Um, you want to find somebody that is compatible in your views and having these discussions also ahead of time. You don't want to match with someone and then have these conversations later and find out that she's just not the right match for you because you have different views. So that is so important. You've touched a little bit on this, but I would like to go a little bit farther. What are some of the things that people may get hung up on that may not be as important in the long run when it comes to choosing a donor or a surrogate? I mean, you mentioned for the surrogate side of things, for example, location is one of those items that people think about that may be really set on when matching, but it's not really important in the long term. What are some other things that you see for both donor selection and surrogate selection?
Mhm. Well, I think again, people look for what's comfortable for them, but if we, let's say with a donor, look at other people who have children, within your own family or even in the public eye, right? Christy Brinkley's daughter looks like Billy Joel, right? The two princes of England look very different from each other. And so you need to remember that you're not necessarily getting that person, you're getting their genetics, and we don't know which genes will be expressed. And so we really need to think about, okay, well, is that person's genetics going to be the right match for my family, not necessarily that person. And if we can have contact with them, if we can get medical updates, that would be great also. But number one, I think, is the health and well-being of your child. And similarly with the surrogacy, you want someone who's really, really committed to the process, right? So we know that the psychological profile of surrogates is typically somebody who's very loving and feels very concerned about the family and is very altruistic and very connected to this process. And for those of us who can't imagine that, we can't imagine we're going to put, our health and our life at risk to help another family because it is a risky process, but these people really, really do care and they really, really want to help you have the best family possible. And they don't get attached to the baby in the way you might fear. They're going to be attached to you. They're going to be attached to the process. They're going to be so excited to see this baby in your hands after they give birth. It's the most beautiful thing for them. And so you want somebody who feels that way. And if you have the right surrogate, this is how your surrogate should be. If you have a surrogate who's like that, who really feels very committed to it and feels like her heart's in it, that is what you want. You don't want someone who's going to be, in it for the money. That's one of the things that we look for. You don't want someone who's going to have a lifestyle that's tumultuous. You want someone who has good support. You want someone who is really caring. And if you have those things, chances are it will be a very good journey for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Now, on a different topic, it's still, about egg donors and surrogates, but as we both know, the process can take a while. So why is it okay and even good that it doesn't happen instantly?
Well, again, I think it's important to make sure that you're with the right agency and the right surrogate. So, yes, you might be able to get a surrogate more quickly, at, Joe's mom and pop surrogacy agency who says, we'll match you tomorrow. But if that agency is not well established, if the people there can't help manage the surrogate, if she has difficulties, if they are unfamiliar with the process, if God forbid something goes wrong and there's a legal issue, they don't know how to handle it. If that happens, the whole thing blows up, so it's not worth it. So in the end, a few more months to wait for the right agency or the right surrogate is really worth your time. And I certainly appreciate that if you've been through fertility treatment, you're a heterosexual couple and you've had infertility, it's so depressing because you wanted a baby 5 years ago and now you have to wait another 6 months. It feels like torture. But in the end, you really need to remember, again, we're thinking about the end goal, and the end goal is a healthy baby. And if things go wrong in the surrogacy process, you can end up starting all over again, or you can be matched with a surrogate who's not right for you, and then you have to get rematched, and that can be a disaster. So it's really important. And I think, again, and I'm just going to make a plug for the psychological screening because I've seen many cases fall apart because the surrogate or donor has not had the right psychological screening. So you need to have a really good mental health professional who's going to follow the guidelines from the American Society for Reproductive Medicine and conduct an interview and a psychological test called the PAI so that you can screen for psychopathology, that there is an indicator for deception, that the surrogate has a partner who's supportive. With a donor, we don't need that. But with the surrogate, we need a partner who's supportive. And if she doesn't have a partner, at least a community or maybe her mother. You feel like if something happens and she's on bed rest, who's going to take care of her kids? Who's going to help her kids get to school? All of those things. You need to make sure that all of those things are taken care of with your agency and with your surrogate. And if you have that, then it's worth waiting a few more months for.
Thank you, Lisa. And yes, this is something that we consider to be very important as well here at Fairfax. And we do all of the screening that we can before the match. And one of the things that you mentioned is having that mental health assessment. And we do that in advance. It may take a little bit longer, but we're making sure that that candidate is emotionally fit to do this process, that she's medically fit to do this process, and also having those conversations about compatibility and wishes and hopes for the journey to ensure that that match goes as smoothly as possible. So we do believe we are aligned. We do believe that screening, it takes a little bit longer for matching, but once you have a match, you can feel very confident in it. Um, Now talking about the wait time, right? You are waiting, it's a long process. What are some tips that you can give people going through this journey to manage those anxiety levels and those emotions during the time that they are waiting?
Well, first of all, I want to address the first thing you said, Perla, which is that you do the psychological screening up front, which is not common just for everybody out there. You need to know that that doesn't happen everywhere. And if your agency is doing that, that's a bonus because then you kind of reached another layer that you wouldn't reach until later. Sometimes people will be very sad because they get matched with a surrogate and they go through the medical process and she's screened medically and she's ready to go, and then she doesn't pass the psychological screening. Now, sometimes it's very difficult if you don't have somebody objective doing the screening because, of course, the person who's employing the therapist may feel like this therapist needs to kind of pass everybody. And so the therapist may go into this feeling like, I want to see the good side of this person because she's already matched. You really want the therapist to be objective and be able to look at her without any feeling that I need to pass this person, because in the long term, you really need to make sure it's the right one. So you don't want to get into a situation where you've had the medical screening, you've had your match meeting, you get along with your surrogate, and then all of a sudden she has psychological screening and everything doesn't work out. And then you have to start all over again. So I think that's great, Perla, that you do that. It's really wonderful. And I think for everybody out there, you should take note of that because it's really a bonus. Um, you're welcome. So I think that, again, it's really hard to manage the time and the stress. And if you're one of those people who feel like you have to, and I've met a lot of people who do this, who feel like on while you're waiting, you have to start, looking on your own for surrogates and bring them to the agency to get screened, and that makes you feel like you're doing something, that's great. If you feel like there's something else that you can do that makes you feel productive, that's fine too. And if you can't, then picking things that will make you feel productive outside of work, outside of fertility, can be really, really helpful. So your body is in this fight or flight response, right? It's feeling anxious, it's feeling triggered. You feel like, I want this to happen tomorrow, and you can't stand it. Your body's dysregulated. Now, whether or not you get a surrogate's contract signed tomorrow or in 6 months from now, you're going to feel like that's your desire. But if you can't achieve it, there's this frustration like, I want to do it, I want to do it, I want to do it, I want to get matched already, and it's not being fulfilled. If you do something else, like redecorate your apartment, take a language class, take a cooking class, learn how to make sushi, whatever it is, your brain thinks that I have this desire to accomplish something, to satisfy my goal of putting my energy into something and seeing a result, and now it's being satisfied. So even though it's not what you want, even though you're not being satisfied in that writing that contract the way you wanted to, you're doing something else and telling your body, I'm putting energy into something every day and I'm seeing the results for my efforts. And that can really help stabilize your body because your body doesn't know the difference between one type of satisfaction and another type of satisfaction. And doing things like that along the way with stress reduction techniques, with support from your therapist, with group therapy, or being part of a community like we have, all of those things can help. But that's one of the things I think that can help most with the weight because it makes you feel more in control and less dysregulated.
I love that. Thank you so
Okay.
much because it can take some time to match. Um, and we want to make sure that our intended parents are feeling comfortable and we want to provide support along the way. And this is so incredibly helpful. I appreciate your insight.
Mhm.
Um, Now, going back to the egg donor, let's say that we found an egg donor that looks wonderful, but there is a family history of mild anxiety and depression. What would be your advice there?
So if it's mild anxiety, or depression or episodic, um, then we're not as worried about it in isolation. So sometimes people go through periods of time in their life where they get depressed about something or anxious about something. We all have issues in life. Nobody goes through this life unscathed, right? So we could, our dog could die. We could have problems our first year of college. We could, talk about how we had, some sort of anxiety about having to do public speaking, whatever it is. We all go through periods of time in our life where we have that. And because this idea of experiencing the anxiety and experience depression has been more normalized in our society, people talk about it more freely. So it's not unusual to see a donor who's had moments like that in their life, a breakup with a boyfriend, whatever it is. And so those sorts of things are natural. Now, if this is historical, if it's been, throughout her life, not just episodic, or let's say if it's in her family, if lots of people have experienced anxiety or depression in your family, then you have to think, well, maybe there's a genetic component to it. Maybe it's not about outside factors. Maybe there's a genetic component to it. Now, if the anxiety itself is not debilitating, if the person feels anxious, let's say around public speaking, and my father felt anxious around public speaking, and so did my uncle, that's not going to change your life and it's probably not going to be a problem for you. But if they feel like it's hard to get out of bed, I'm so depressed, or it's hard to get to work, or for some reason I can't go to social events because I have such a terrible social anxiety, those sorts of things are more debilitating. And if that's also in your family, there's a good chance that maybe there's a genetic component. So again, if it's mild, we're not as worried about it. If it's more severe, we're worried about it. And then the other piece, as I said, is how is that particular difficulty going to combine with your family history? So if people in your family have had anxiety and you're the genetically linked parent, remember you're using a donor. So the other parents, genetics is not really important for this part, of course, they're equally important as a parent, but in terms of genetics, their history is not important. The genetically linked parents' history is what we're looking at. And if that person in their history has also debilitating anxiety, and so does the donor, then maybe you'll say, well, maybe that's not a good match for me.
Thank you so much. And now you've talked about genetics when it comes to the egg donor. What about a history of anxiety and depression for your surrogate?
So for the surrogate, again, right, we're looking at the genetics for the donor and we're looking at lifestyle for the surrogate. So with the surrogate, we want to make sure that her lifestyle is stable. So when we're going through their history, we're looking for things like if they had postpartum depression, we don't want them to go through that again. And maybe you'll say, well, she recovered from it, it was fine. But if it was significant for her or traumatic for her, we don't want her to go through that again, right? We're concerned about how she's going to manage that. If, let's say, she's had lots of trauma and there are things that are going to reactivate her trauma in the surrogacy journey, we don't want to take that risk, right? Because she might get very unstable sometime in the surrogacy journey. If she's had some family history of anxiety that's very strong, and because of that, she's always had difficulty managing it, we also are going to be a little concerned about that and look into how she's been able to manage. Now, if she's had children already and she's raised them with no problem and she's managed her anxiety, even though she's had it, chances are she can do it for you also. And so we see evidence, yes, you can do this. Yes, you can go through pregnancy and delivery and manage your life and still keep your job and still keep your marriage intact. So we see some evidence that she can manage her anxiety, but we're less worried about the genetics unless they affect her now, because again, with the surrogate, we're looking at her lifestyle and making sure that she can go through this journey, which has more demands on it than a regular pregnancy, right? She's going to have to get along with you. She's going to have to get along with the lawyer. She's going to have to get along with the surrogacy agency. There are going to be demands put on her in terms of taking injections and going to doctor's appointments. Maybe when she was pregnant with her child, maybe she didn't show up to a few of those appointments and she didn't care. She has to do all of that because there are other people involved now. So can she manage all of those extra responsibilities and get along with everyone? So those are things that we're going to look for. And if she's feeling so uncomfortable or anxious that she's going to have to isolate herself or she's not going to be able to manage some of these things, we don't want her to be a surrogate because she's not good for you, but also it's not good for her.
Thank you, Lisa. And we see this, right? We see this all the time, and it's not white or black. And
Mhm.
that's why we heavily rely on the expertise of the mental health professionals, because you have to look at the full picture,
Yep.
like you explained. And the circumstances are going to change whether that anxiety or depression can affect the journey or not.
Yes.
Mhm. Thank you so much. Now, switching back, well, let's talk about couples. Couples are approaching the decision of choosing their egg donor or their surrogate, and one of them loves a candidate, and the other one is not sure that they want to move forward with that candidate. How do you recommend they manage those conversations?
So I think it's really similar to most of the things that you're going to deal with in parenting, right? There's lots of things that you're going to have to deal with as a parent because if you're willing to pursue surrogacy or donor conception, you're going to be a parent, right? It's going to happen for you eventually. I have confidence in that because it does for most people. So how are you going to manage these sorts of conversations in your marriage or in your partnership when you come up with Do I feed on demand or do I feed on schedule? Do I sleep train or do I not sleep train? Are we going to raise our child with religion or not? Are we going to live in a city or are we going to live in the suburbs? There's going to be lots and lots of questions, and that's just, very early on. As your child goes through school and all the things that happen in your life, you're going to have lots of things that you're going to have to agree on. And I think one of the ways, and there's lots of ways to kind of come to a meeting of the minds, but I think one of the ways is if one person says, this is really important to me, and the other person says, this is not important to me, or I like this surrogate, or I don't like this surrogate, let's look at the objective evidence. Let's look at, well, what makes a good surrogate? What is going to give us the best surrogate possible? Let's look at the evidence, and then let's compare it to both our responses. Now, I'm not saying that we have to leave our feelings out of it entirely, because there may be moments where you feel very strongly. I once worked with a man who felt so strongly about having a donor who was Russian, because his family came from Russia and they made all these Russian meals and they spoke Russian at home, and he really wanted that culture to continue in his family even though he was not going to have a genetically linked child to his partner. He felt like this was something he wanted to keep going. And so sometimes we have very strong desires, and this, we can't do anything about that. And that happens with all of these things. It even happens with, medical testing and termination decisions. What one person sees as 20% may feel like too much, and another person might say 20% of this problem is not enough to worry about. So we also have to consider your feelings, but I think first, look at the objective issues here. What makes a good surrogate? And then see if either one of those parties changes their mind. And usually they do.
Yes, I've seen this many years, right? When one of them is like, I love her, but we need to have this conversation because my partner is still not sure. And on that very same topic, what would you say to people that feel frozen in giving that final step because they feared making the wrong decision
About their surrogate?
about their donor or their surrogate?
Mhm. So I think it's really hard, of course, to make this decision, but I think if you kind of go through these steps, and that's why I outlined these 5 steps to choosing a donor in my book and in my video program, because I think once you have a framework and you can say all of these boxes are checked, you can feel better, right? It's very hard to know, what should I look for? What is important? And so that's why I go over that in my programs, because I think it really helps people feel like, okay, I can go through this checklist. And if they're all checked, I feel much better because I have this objective viewpoint. Very often people don't, right? Very often people say, oh, this person seems nice, and so let's go with her. And nice is great, but it's not enough, right? You need good genetics with a donor, and with a surrogate, you need a good lifestyle. Those things are so important. And I think what's also important is the match. So I've seen some people who were coming across my schedule, who I'd look at and think, oh boy, I don't really know if this surrogate is going to make it. I don't know if she's going to kind of get through the process and actually match with these patients. So for example, one woman I worked with was very, very strong, and she had a very strong opinion about everything she was doing in her life. She felt like her way was the right way, and everything had to be a certain way, and she knew it all. And usually you want a surrogate to be flexible, right? Because they're going to have to be able to get along with lots of different people and do lots of different things. And I thought, you know what, she is too strong-minded probably to manage this and to get through it well and to match with the intended parents. And so, but she was already at the group meeting point, and so I said, okay, well, let's just see what happens. So she met with the intended parents, and they said, oh, thank God we have this surrogate. We love her so much because we feel so insecure about pregnancy. We know nothing about pregnancy. We feel so insecure about it. We feel so relieved to have somebody who can give us directions and tell us what to do. And so for them, that was great. It was a perfect match for them. So, we also have to remember that people are different. And so your match might be different based upon your needs. But I think kind of going back to the original point, first look at the objective points and the things that are necessary, and then look at the things that you really like.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And I ask because, oftentimes the intended parents have been waiting for so long to match with a surrogate, and we have someone for them who meets their needs, their criteria, who we think is going to be great for them. We do the match meeting, everybody likes each other, but then they freeze. They freeze. And you don't hear from them for a few days, or they're not ready to take that next step. And it's interesting. It's the psychology of it is interesting because they're perfect for each other and you know it, and everything went well, but then it's just taking that next step. They freeze and they're not sure how, okay, is this the right decision? Am I ready? Do I want to move forward? We see that really often.
Well, I think it's just kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier. Just because we feel something, it doesn't mean it's the right thing for us, right? Just
Mhm.
because I want this donor, I screened a donor who had blonde hair, light eyes. She had lots of commonalities with my family. Like things in her family were very similar to my family. And as I'm screening her, I thought to myself, well, if I were looking for an egg donor, I would choose her because she's like so similar to me in so many ways. She looks like me. She has very similar things. Turns out she has four brothers, all with red hair and freckles. So if I had chosen that donor, that would have been the wrong match, right? So just because you like somebody, it doesn't necessarily mean that that might be the right match for you. So again, if we can kind of pull ourselves back from our anxiety by doing these things to help our nervous system and say, okay, I might not feel like choosing a donor right now. I may not feel like signing up with my surrogacy agency right now. I may not feel like it, but let me step back from my emotions for a moment and think about what's best for me. Sometimes we do things when we don't feel like it that are good for us. Exercise, going to work, whatever it might be. And that may be one of those things. So I think, again, if we can take care of our emotional life and separate our emotional life so we can clear our head and think about what's in our best interest, it's much easier to make a decision.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. That's so helpful. Now, changing subject a little bit, you have built a wonderful community of internet parents and you have a wonderful platform. Can you please share more about your platform and how internet parents and surrogates and egg donors can benefit from it?
Yeah, thank you so much, Perla. Yes, so I was, as you know, I was the only therapist asked to testify before the New York State Senate Judiciary Committee to legalize surrogacy in New York because I'd seen so many cases. And again, I think there's so much that patients don't know. We don't have any way to regulate surrogacy agencies or donor agencies in this country. We can look at the SART report, which is available on the ASRM website. It used to be on the CDC website. I don't think it'll be there long, but on the asrm.org website, for those of you who are interested, you can look at your clinic statistics and it helps you be objective about choosing a clinic. There's no such thing for agencies, egg donor agencies, surrogacy agencies. So I spoke a little bit before about how to kind of think about choosing an agency. But that's one of those things that people don't necessarily know about. They just don't know. And there's so much we don't know when we come into the clinic and we want to start a surrogacy journey or we want to start an egg donation journey, or we're a queer couple and thinking, well, do I only just need sperm or do I just need eggs or is there something else I need to be doing? There's so many questions and the internet is, full of information, some bad, some good, but it's hard to know what's what. And so I really feel like kind of in this like last chapter of my career, I wanted to put everything that I've done in one place so people can manage their emotions better. And so we have guided meditations to help you regulate your nervous system. We have lots of downloadable material. I have tons of ebooks on every subject you can imagine. And we have these chat rooms where you can go into a chat room for your journey. If you're a queer couple, if you're a single parent to be, if you're a heterosexual couple, if you're using surrogacy or egg donation, you can go into your separate chat rooms. The playlist for all of my videos on YouTube and my podcast are categorized, so you can go to your specific journey and get all the videos that you want on that. And then the best part also is the almost weekly workshops, and you will be on one of our workshops, Perla, which I'm very excited for, and they are recorded, so they're there forever. And so you get to have like a podcast live. You get to ask people questions in real time. And then, of course, our courses, which are great. The courses about how to choose a donor, how to choose a surrogacy agency, how to understand your surrogacy journey, how to understand the legal contract, everything you need to know about development for donor-conceived children, because people think about that. They think, what's my child going to be like at 5 or 10? So there's lots and lots of content there, and you can download it on your phone. So, if you're like me, you might want to be listening to a course while you're folding the laundry or emptying the dishwasher. That's fine. I think when you have a question, you need to be able to get it answered in real time. And so it's available to you all the time, anytime you want it, 24/7.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think this is so helpful for those considering this journey, whether you want to help somebody or you need the help of somebody. I think research is so important, and you're absolutely right. There is so much online, and you don't know what's right, what's wrong, what to believe, what not to believe. So I urge everybody listening to go visit Lisa's website. She has so much experience, and as she mentioned herself, not only professionally but on the personal side. So I think you are gonna really benefit from learning the different aspects of the process through her platform. I am so happy you put that together, Lisa.
Oh, thank you so much, Phil. And just so for everybody out there, it's www.familybuilding.net. And you can also follow me on Instagram or TikTok or any of the media platforms I'm posting constantly. And again, the podcast is called Building Your Family, just like my book, and Building Your Family Community, which I think is wonderful. And I really appreciate your support, Perla. And I'm so grateful to be here and to be connected with you, because you're an icon in this industry and you've done so many wonderful things and helped so many patients. So I really appreciate you as well.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words, Lisa. And before we go, and you've already touched on this, but what's the one thing you wish people knew when they are about to start their third-party reproduction journey?
I think again, the most important thing people don't realize is that everything that they need to know is out there. They can get it, and it's important to try to get the facts. And it's very, very important to remember that you can easily be swayed by your emotional life. I
Mhm.
can't tell you how many people say, I chose my donor because she felt so right to me. I felt like I just saw her profile and I heard her narrative and I fell in love with her, which is lovely. But if she has some difficulties in your family that you also have, or there's some other issues, none of it matters, right? Because ultimately you want to parent a healthy child. So I think, again, it's the most important thing is to remember that your emotional life is really important and needs to be valued, but you also need to take care of it so you can make objective decisions as you move through these paths.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And something I like to do when we have interviews, we know the professional, but just one question about the person behind this wonderful professional. And that, Lisa, where can people find you? What do you do outside of this? What do you enjoy doing when you're not working?
Mm. Well, my work is also my hobby because I love it. So I have to
Mhm.
admit, but I just started taking up golf. And
Oh,
so tonight I have a golf lesson. So I'm trying to do that. I think, it'll be a nice activity. I like to exercise. I like to see my children. and spend time with them. That's, my first priority, of course, and my husband. And we have a dog who we love, and he's, also a member of our family. And I love to travel. That's really fun for me too. So, I really feel like it's really important to think clearly about what's important to you in life and make sure that you keep those things in your life. It's really hard when you're going through fertility treatment. It's so consuming. Or even, if you're in your surrogacy journey, it's very consuming to feel all the feelings you're going to have. Even if you're, let's say, a gay couple and you say, I feel weird because I'm not involved in it, right? Because I feel like here's a person out there who's carrying our baby and I can't be pregnant. I can't have this experience. My eggs are not even involved in that. I feel like I'm so disconnected and I'm preoccupied with that. Whatever it is that is preoccupying you in this journey is very natural to feel that way, but it's also important to remember that those other things also need to be part of your life, and you need to be able to put them in your life so you can keep going and keep feeling joy in your life and keep feeling energized so you can get through to the end, because you want to make that transition, as I say, from patient to parent. And it's the most beautiful transition in the world when it happens, and you'll be amazed how happy you are. So I think it's really important to continue to put things in your life that are beneficial along the way.
Love that. Striking that balance,
Mhm. As much
right?
as you
Between your
can.
process, don't make it be everything you're doing, but also find something that you enjoy doing. Same advice for all of us, right?
Yes. Hard to do, but important.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for all your insights and for all your advice and your expertise. And thank you, everybody, for watching us. And we are going to put this together in our YouTube channel. And also, we are going to write a blog article with some of the most important things that we've discussed today that you can refer to in writing. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.